Thank you everyone for sticking around for the NCIT May Roadshow section meeting. We've got a lot of good presentations planned, but I did want to provide some NCIT updates first. We don't get to South Dakota very often, but about 5 years ago, we did have a virtual presentation on Sturgis. That was the last time we kind of highlighted the South Dakota section. We tried to do kind of a 4 to 5 year rotation, getting back through South Dakota, North Dakota, and really engaging two key states in our footprint for NCITE. So my name is Joe DeVore. I'm the current NCIT president this year. I'd like to start kind of in-room introductions. I knew this would take a while, so our presentation is not going to start till 12:30. I wanted to start the introductions now with that time. My current role in NCIT is the president. I'm going to start at this table up here, right as Justin took a bite, so I'm going to give him a couple of seconds. And then Brian can maybe start us off. Just your name, introduction, employer, and that helps us get to know the room a little better.
Brian Carey, Minnesota DOT.
Justin Sear, Alliant NCITE Director.
The Friesen with AP3 Consultants.
Jake Fulcaringa, Fulton Knight. I was the NCITE president in 2020, so fun to be back.
Paul Deutsch, I'm with Alltech Engineers.
This is Sharma.
Matt Morrison from Power Engineering.
Dave Huff, South Dakota DOT.
James Under with HDR Engineering.
Dave Hoffeisner with Sioux Falls.
Dan Barlick, South Dakota Operations.
Mark Peterson, South Dakota DOT, Aberdeen.
Ethan D. Dave Hoff.
Westbrook Drive at Parsons.
Nick Costello, Washington County, Minnesota, current NCITE past president.
Adam Henning with Alfred Fulton Polovic and with the Novite regions.
Brian Guy, City of Omaha.
Everything from South Dakota DOT.
John Sumlo, South Dakota DOT.
Steve Cameron, South Dakota DOT.
Mike Fender,
Fulton Knight.
Dan Miller, North Dakota DOT.
Joe Thomas, North Dakota DOT.
Kyle, South Dakota DOT.
Warren Miller, City of
Steve Dunphy, Salzburg, Holton, Holder.
Brad Hardman, Salzburg, Holton.
Nick Van Gunn, Aligned Engineering.
They're full and at the moment and that. Krista May, for that member.
From Riggins for Riggins.
Steve Graham, South Dakota DOT.
John DeVore, South Dakota DOT.
I guess HDR. And Mike Polovich, HDR.
All right, thank you for going around. Yep.
Trajan Hassan, Upper Gateway Transportation Institute.
Yeah.
I'm involved with the NCIDC camp committee.
Thanks. All right. Well, I did have a few opening slides here. Who is ITE? As an organization, we are a community of transportation professionals, really looking at safety, operations, planning, and how we kind of bring all of that together to support transportation throughout the country. ITE headquarters is in Washington, D.C. We consist of 17,000 members across 78 countries, including 150 plus student chapters now. We provide knowledge and education, best practices, and emerging trends through a lot of the publications, skills and professional development through section meetings, district meetings, and annual meetings. And then that connection to that global transportation network through a lot of our IT journal, Spotlight IT, and kind of that social media and communications aspect of IT. We consist of 11 districts, 72 sections, and 11 chapters. NCITE is part of the Greater Great Lakes District, which encompasses our 3 states, as well as Wisconsin, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. I wanted to highlight too our 5 student groups that are part of NCITE, Duluth Transportation, DITSO, ITSO, which is the University of Minnesota's student group, NDSU, SDSU, and then our newest student chapter in NCITE, which is UND. So a year in NCITE, we have about 6 to 8 monthly section meetings. We do try to have a virtual component as part of all of those meetings. So being a member of ITE, we try to get that access to our outer districts in greater Minnesota so that they can also see a lot of our in-person events. We do have an annual meeting once a year, usually hosted in November. And then a transportation symposium that in the past has been in October. But we've also hosted that in the spring too. That usually is every other year. That is more of a 1-day or 1.5 day conference. Our monthly committee meetings, we ended up consolidating from, I believe we're at 7 down to 5 committees, really focusing on technical elements. Our SimCap committee and planning, complete streets, and design. And then other ones are available as well. We also like to partner with organizations like ACEC, MSES, and WTS to really help facilitate that interdiscipline knowledge sharing, like our ethics presentation that we just hosted a few weeks ago in April with WTS. And then lastly, social events, golf outing. We're on our 3rd year of our golf outing, usually held the first week of August at Cedar Home. We try to make this a targeted 9-hole event for newer golfers as an option to just get involved with kind of that transportation professional golfing that sometimes is a little intimidating when you have to sign up for an 18-hole scramble. One big update this year is our ITE International Annual Meeting is overlapping with our Great Lakes District Annual Meeting. This is being hosted in Detroit this year from July 19th through 22nd. Registration is still open and early bird rate until the end of May. So if you are interested in getting to Detroit, there's going to be a lot of technical content at that conference. As part of that, the Student Leadership Summit is 2 days before that, the Friday and Saturday. We have 2 kind of student groups from NCITE that will be participating in both the Student Leadership Summit and the Traffic Bowl. So one is a University of Minnesota team, and then one is more of a all-star team of the Greater Minnesota kind of teaming together. So if there are students and interns that you have as professionals that are interested in learning more about transportation, getting them involved with our student outreach coordinators is a good way to then get them involved with annual meetings coming up, whether that's on the district level or the international level. So a couple of those upcoming events, we are co-hosting our summer social with WTS, ITS Minnesota at the St. Paul Saints game. That is scheduled for July 23rd. It's a $15 member ticket, so very affordable because we have a lot of sponsors with that event. But if anyone is out that way in July, we'd love to have you at that event. And then, as I was mentioning, our golf event is tentatively scheduled for that first week of August, which would be that Thursday, August 6th. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our first set of speakers. So we do have Dave Huff from South Dakota DOT, Jake Volkeringa from Bolton and Mink, and to start off the presentation, Josh Larson from McLaury Engineering. I'll hand it over to Josh.
So, Josh Larson with McLaury Engineering, and today, is going to run down the I-29 variable speed limit corridor. This is a project that was recently completed here in South Dakota, and it was in service here for the first time this winter. So we'll have Jake will come up and present here, and Dave Huft will join me. But today we're just going to share just kind of a little bit about, I guess I'm going to kick it off with what I joke about is the fun section of the presentation, the project background, and then Jake and Dave will give a little bit more about the details here. So this project, the project limits, we start, so this project is about 35 miles straight north of here. So if you go over to I-29 and head north, I think it's mile marker 80 is Sioux Falls. We started at 114, which is the Flandreau exit there. And so as you go north through the corridor, some of the landmarks through this section, if you're familiar with this area, 117 there is a large slough area that's just adjacent to the interstate. Exit 121 is the Ward exit. There's South Dakota DOT has a rest area at that location. 124 there is the Big Sioux River crossing. 127 is the Madary Creek crossing there. And then as you get into Brookings, we got the three interchanges, 130, 132, and 133 there. All right, so when we kicked off this project, we identified four critical success factors for this project. The first one is we wanted to improve the safety and reliability for this corridor. So we knew that those two things were a big success factor for this project. Secondly was the stakeholder synergy. We wanted to hear what all the stakeholders on this corridor, what they dealt with, what the problems were, what the issues were, and just how they got out there and handled those problems along the corridor. And then we wanted to look at the design efficiency. So with our design, trying to make this a very cost-effective approach, but also have it just a high-quality product for the user when it was all said and done. And then constructability. We wanted to make sure that our plan set was easy to understand. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't overly complicated and that we could get a lot of contractors that would want to bid this project. So those were the four success factors that we were looking at. We created this dashboard here, so we utilized all the data that we had available to us, put it into the dashboard, and we were able to kind of look a little closer at the data and start to see some trends and some different issues that popped up along the corridor. And the main thing we saw with the data was just the primary issue was safety along the corridor, and specifically during inclement weather. So the bar graph here on the bottom right is, I think the years there are 2018 to 2022 was that data. And you can notice there that the biggest contributor to accidents along this corridor was the inclement weather. So as we started to put this stuff into, we created this heat map, we could kind of see where all these accidents were occurring at. And so some of these locations here on the map that really stand out, if you look closer at these locations, the first one is, I don't know if you can see the numbers there, but the first one on the far left is 115, and that's the Flandreau interchange there. What we heard with this location is that the weather just seems to change at this spot. So south there, sometimes it'll be wet. The road conditions seem okay, but then for some reason, right at this location, things seem to change all the time. So it will get icy as you head north there. 117 was another location that stood out. That was the slough area there. And then 124 was the Big Sioux River crossing. And then the next larger heat spot there was 126, 127. That was the Madary Creek crossing. But also with that location there, if you're familiar with that, the interstate sits down lower than the adjacent ground on both sides. So it gets a little different wind action through there and some drifting and stuff. So saw that as a problem area. And then lastly, 132 is the main exit into Brookings. Secondary issues with just reliability. We wanted to make sure I guess, looked at the reliability of this corridor. On the right there, we have a pie chart showing just the data from the same time frame, 2018 to 2022. We had the free flow data, the mostly reliable, and then the unreliable section is shown there. Some other background on this corridor in 2022, the far left graphic there shows that there's 3 full roadway closures for that section. And then the next graphic there, the 9 football trophies, you might think that might be represents how many national championships the Jackrabbits have. That's a good guess. That's not correct. That was 9 home football games that they had in 2022. Just created a lot of congestion and traffic along the corridor. So just some of the background data that we had, and I guess I'm going to kick it over to Jake here to get a little further into the details.
All right, thank you, Josh. So I want to talk a little bit about the proposed system and what we came up with based on kind of this background data here. First off, we did do an extensive kind of stakeholder process, engagement process at the beginning, working with everyone from obviously DOT staff, maintenance staff, ITS staff, state patrol, to really understand what the issues were along the corridor. And we kind of talked about those, or Josh just talked about those in the previous slides. But we also wanted to make sure we really understood what did the people need? What did the operators or the users and drivers of the system need to make the success? We didn't just want to throw VSL out there as a cool technology and hope it worked. So we did follow the systems engineering process. I won't get into the details of that, but on the screen you can kind of see those are the kind of 8 key user needs that were developed as part of the systems engineering. Obviously, we turned those into requirements and detailed requirements, and eventually the design, but that kind of laid the groundwork for the system and what we wanted to design. All right, here I'm going to play a quick video that we put together. This was during the design process, so this is just like a simulation of what the system would look like and how it would work. We use this like the public engagement meeting, things like that, just to give people an idea of what this might seem like. So as you can see here, this is just a typical day on the corridor. You can see it's sunny. This variable speed limit sign says 80 miles an hour. Everything is good. It's a little laggy here, but I think it's going. Here we go. As the snowstorm starts to roll in, we see the snow, the detection, the cameras, they're detecting that snow. ITS staff might be meeting with region staff and saying, hey, we need to lower the speed limit. It can get lowered to 60, you can lower it to 45. That's a decision they make. It's not automated based on the weather. Then as the weather improves, maybe the snow plows are out, things start to clear up, we can slowly raise that speed limit back up to 60 and ultimately the 80 back to those free flow conditions. That's just a quick synopsis of how it works, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the details of the different ITS devices and components that go into a system like this. All right, so on the top are what we call the core VSL system components, the things that were really necessary to make this work. On the bottom are other ITS devices that were done with the project that are really complementary services, I would say, for operations along the corridor. Obviously, you have the variable speed limit signs. That's just an example of one there. That's what you were using to convey to the motorist what the current speed limit is. The second picture there is an environmental sensor station. So from that, we're getting different road weather data. Could be pavement friction, could be visibility, could be wind speeds, could be humidity, different factors that we want to use to understand the conditions on the roadway. Vehicle detection, that's all about really traffic speeds. How fast are people going? Are we seeing a lot of slowdowns due to weather or something else? Cameras providing us, the eyes in the sky to see what's going on out there. But like I said, we did consider some supporting ITS systems, dynamic message signs to give more detailed traveler information to the public about what's going on, if it's a weather event or maybe it's there's a backup for a Jackrabbit football game. Ramp queue detection was also actually really, that's mainly used again during those home football games where the exit ramps to the SDSU area are backing up so much that their cars are on the main line. Obviously, if there's cars stopping or slowing down on mainline lanes of I-29, we're going to have problems. So that's something we looked at. Road closure gates, they use those throughout South Dakota to close the freeway as needed during inclement weather events. And also road closure gate signs. Those are signs that might be on I-29 or on one of the crossroads to make sure people know the roadway is closed ahead. So those are kind of the different components. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about each one of them, why they're included, how we place them, and that sort of thing. So this first map here, or this first slide, is about the VSL signs themselves. And I know it might be a little hard to see. The corridor is divided into two halves there. The very south end is on the top left, and we kind of have a match line on the right, and then you go back down a row and go to the right, so south to north. What we did for the VSL signs is we desired to replace all the existing speed limit signs that were out there. So typically you have a speed limit sign after an entrance ramp when you get on at an interchange. So we made sure we were replacing all of those. But we also did add some additional signage at 118, the Big Sioux River crossing, and between the US 14 interchanges. And that's because those were areas where we saw some particularly challenging traffic operations where it might be helpful to have additional speed information. You can kind of see on the map, that crash sheet map that Josh had up there earlier, we have it displayed on here, and it was really kind of correlating where do we have weather challenges, where do we have accidents, and trying to place devices accordingly. The latest version of the MUTCD, it's been out a while now, does have strict, or has rules on what an MUTCD or what a VSL sign should look like. It needs to be white LEDs on a black background. On the bottom right there, that's where you place a speed limit sign in general from the MUTCD. So we really use that as our guidance for where these signs should be placed. It doesn't show it here, but they also have a beacon on the top of the sign. You'll see a photo later that is flashing when it's not at 80 miles an hour. We also place signs on both sides of the roadway. So if you're driving on I-29 northbound, there's two lanes, but there's a sign on the left, the inside shoulder, and the outside shoulder, to make sure you can see those if you're next to a semi truck or something like that. Next up were the environmental sensor stations. We didn't feel like we needed a ton of these throughout the corridor. We really wanted to hit kind of the bad weather spots. There was an existing one already at one of the interchanges. We wanted to include one at the Big Sioux River crossing. As looking at the crash data, there were a lot of inclement weather crashes at the location. And then there's one more in the Brookings area. But again, we're using that as a way to get pavement friction, visibility, humidity, other factors that we can use to help us determine, is the road slippery? Do we need to modify the speed limit accordingly? Vehicle detection. So this is, again, these are not, this picture shows a non-intrusive detector, I realize. That's what we were thinking at one point. We actually have loop detection on this project. And that's kind of placed at all the key interchanges so we can assess vehicle speeds. We did add it at a few interim locations like the Big Sioux River crossing, again, just on places where we thought we might have slowdowns based on the data. And we also really tried to co-locate ITS devices. There's several ITS devices along this corridor, but if we're gonna have power and communications at point X, at the Big Sioux River crossing, it's a lot easier to put a couple of ITS devices there. So really trying to co-locate devices. Another thing I want to talk about with the vehicle detection is it's not just useful for detecting when vehicles are slowing down, but it was also a useful tool to help us evaluate how well the system worked. So we can look at, okay, what are speeds before the snow event, let's say? How are speeds changing during? And then how are we getting back up, to normal conditions? So the detection was a key part of that evaluation. I think Dave has some slides on that later on. Cameras, I think this is pretty obvious. You guys have all seen traffic cameras in different environments. Again, trying to co-locate these where we were already providing power or communications anyway. Maybe it's at a place we see a lot of crashes, interchanges, river crossing. One thing I will note is we did not, these cameras have you can probably see at least half a mile, maybe a mile if the conditions are ideal. We realize when you're using the VSL system, the conditions aren't ideal. You might have whiteout conditions. So by no means is it, end-to-end full camera coverage during any condition. But in general, on a nice day, we can see most of the corridor with some extra ones kind of in the Brookings area. DMS, this is something that we went back and forth on a little bit actually as part of the project. There was an existing DMS on the north end. The south end, we thought about adding one. Different perspectives on this. Obviously, a nice thing about a DMS is you can provide that additional information to motorists as they enter the VSL corridor. And a couple other states have told us they find better response to the VSL system if you can provide that supplemental information. You know, it says icy road ahead or there's a crash. It seems like people slow down better if they know why they're slowing down rather than just seeing a sign with a different number on it. We actually ended up keeping on the north end of the system, we have the existing DMS there, but we did end up using these variable speed zone ahead and end speed limit signs. Again, these are part of the new MUTCD. Variable speed limits are well covered in that to notify drivers as they enter the corridor that they're coming into a variable speed zone. Ramp queue detection. This is, like I talked about earlier, really in the Brookings area, focused on those, hard to see the colors on there, those 3 places where there's orange triangles. That's for use during football games. We looked at some different options. How do we want to do these? What we ended up doing, I know State Patrol will a lot of times just have someone go out there and help manage things. We did connect it to the nearest ITS cabinet. So Dave, when he gets his ATMS operational, we get a notification that the queue is built up, and he could use that to post a message on a DMS if he wanted. But it's also connected to the signal cabinet. So if we wanted to activate a particular phase to flush the queue, we could do that as well. Road closure gates. This was another one that we had some different conversations about. Do we want road closure gates at all the interchanges or ramp closure gates? There's mainly the main line gates obviously force you to exit. The ramp gates prevent you from getting on. So we worked with the region to figure out where those made sense. At locations where we didn't have the location is not shown here. So the Brookings area, we had gates throughout this, but on the other portions of the corridor, a lot of times we put up a sign like you can see in the bottom right. That's from a different project, but something like that. So on the cross street, as you're approaching I-90, you do get a sign that at least is telling you that I-90 or I-29 in this case is closed. We did do some consideration of possibly automating the gates. And by that, I mean the ability to remotely have the gate lower and raise. A lot of times with that, you want to have a camera or something to make sure it's working properly. But I know there are region staff that are located close in the area, and that's something that did not end up being included in the project, but something South Dakota might consider for future projects. A few other things, just high level with the design, power and communications. We talked a little bit, or I mentioned this a little bit earlier. The top graph there is kind of shows our approach for power at an interchange. We really tried to kind of make some centralized power locations. So maybe there's a power service at this interchange. That's where we have a camera, maybe a vehicle detection, and we provide kind of power to that cabinet, and we also put backup power there. We also try to provide power to the adjacent VSL signs from that location. We're trying to minimize the number of power services we have along the corridor. Like I said, it also enables us to provide backup power at one central location. We did decide upon battery backup for all the sites, and all the sites also have a generator hookup. So if we were to see a significant power outage that lasted days, if the region wanted to, they could bring generators out there to power some of the signs. From a communications perspective, we looked at different options. Obviously, South Dakota DOT having their own fiber, that would be awesome. That'd be great. That'd be reliable, but it's very expensive. We looked in the lease fiber. There's some other fiber in the area, wireless radios. We ended up going with cellular communications. That's what the DOT uses for their ITS communications for a lot of devices across the state. And it's plenty adequate for what we're doing here with posting messages to sign, getting camera images, things like that. And it's operated really quite well. There was a previous design from a I-90 VSL in Sturgis that was done before this. And unfortunately, that one, the bids came in high, and we wanted to make sure we incorporated some of those lessons learned from that previous project into ours. And some of these Josh talked about a little bit earlier, is we wanted to make sure these plans were simple and clear. And we needed to get bidders. That one that previously was bid for Sturgis along I-90, they only received one bid. It was way over the engineer's estimate, and the project wasn't able to move forward. We didn't want that to happen here, so we tried to take some lessons learned and incorporate them. Some other specific things we did is, and I know that corridor originally they wanted to do fiber the entire way. Can save a lot of money by not doing a fiber deployment. We kind of simplified the roadside cabinet design. That other project also, they had backup generators permanently installed at a lot of sites with underground propane tanks to power them. So we really work with the stakeholders to talk about what do we really need? We want to make sure this project is successful and has a reasonable cost. And those are some of the decisions we made really to optimize that design. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave to talk more about the construction and how the system operates.
I can't do two things at once, so. Before I get started, Brian, how much time do we have left?
Still got 20 minutes, 25.
Oh, okay, I won't take nearly a little. I wanted to take time to acknowledge some other people in the room here who were really involved in this. And Pat, I'll start with you. Pat Brueggemann works in our IT, works in our ITS office. He's electrical engineer. And he did a lot of the work of being on site with Ingolstadt Electric to make sure that stuff got installed right and that it worked when it was installed. And a huge amount of the success there. And where's Christina? She disappeared?
She left.
She left. Now, she's not going to get acknowledged. Mark and Travis, would you please? So Mark Peterson is our Aberdeen Region Engineer. This project is half in Aberdeen. Well, it's not two-thirds in Aberdeen, 1/3 in Mitchell Region. And so the question was, well, who's going to run this? And I think Mark drew the short straw. So he was the one who was actually deciding when to impose or activate the lower speed limits. And without the ATMS, he was doing a lot of that just by sheer dedication and time. So, and then Steve. Steve and Christina were involved in setting up monitoring. There were requirements that when we impose this, we have to keep records of when the speed limits were imposed, what the reason was, what levels they went to. And without the ATMS to automatically record that, Steve set up some process where those instances could be entered. And so there were several people involved in this, and I just wanted to make sure you got your acknowledgement for it. The use cases that we really designed this for were primarily for severe weather. Because of the nature of the corridor, there were a larger number of winter crashes and fatalities there than on the interstate. But there are other uses. So if there were a traffic incident, you could slow traffic speeds down. If there were construction or work zone going on in the corridor, you could use it for that. Or and Jake referred to the special events, primarily the SDSU football games. Another curious event is move-in day at SDSU, when all the students show up, and it's astounding how much congestion you get from that event. But primarily, this is a winter VSL system. We wanted to be careful to communicate to people that it's not a speed trap. And you all know that if you've got a blizzard going and you've got winter driving conditions, you're not out there running speeding tickets. That's, just not a smart thing to do at all, to create more disruption on the roadway. And it's not a way to reduce speeds during normal driving conditions. It's an 80-mile-an-hour speed limit. There are people that go more than 80. They mostly have Minnesota plates, Brian. Something about 9 miles over the speed limit. There's some kind of a weird deal in Minnesota about that. You don't get points if you're not more than 9 miles an hour over. So that means you can drive 89. It doesn't work. And it's not a way to use the cameras or anything to record or identify people. That's not part of it either. And so some of the messaging that we've done, for our public information, is to try to communicate the purpose of the VSL and what the purpose is not. This was a manually controlled process. We do not have an ATMS to automate it. And more than that, we didn't really know the rules of the game. When if you were gonna put rules into an ATMS on how to automate it, what would they be? We don't have enough experience to know what that should be. And we actually have legislative requirements that require manual action and review. And so this is not an automated system, but we get information from the cameras, from the speed sensors, from visibility and the road sensors for the road condition. Mark evaluates that. He talks to other people. This is a partnership also with the South Dakota Highway Patrol and the local law enforcement, getting information about their perceptions. And then there's a decision that the speed limit is appropriate to lower. There is approval process for that. And then as time goes on, the speed limit drops. As time goes on, all that information is continuously reevaluated. And Mark also uses forecasted weather information. So we have our maintenance decision support system that is forecasting what the road conditions are going to become. And so that's another element that goes into the consideration here. So these are the rules that we established. These were not established by AI. They were established by dartboard and judgment. Thought it should be. So it takes into consideration the visibility, the average traffic speed, what the road surface conditions are, and you'll see that we can set speed limits in 10-mile-an-hour increments. We had thought about 5-mile-an-hour increments to start with, and then it seemed like, well, our knowledge was not that refined yet to say what should it be 65 or 60. Now that could change in the future. But for starters, we just did 10-mile-an-hour increments down to 40. And the idea was is if it got lower than 40, then the road should probably be closed. So we weren't planning to set VSL lower than 40. And so you won't go through the chart here just to show you the factors that are considered and how, as conditions get worse, the appropriate speed limit drops. And as the conditions restore, then you bump up to the higher speed limits again. The way this is supposed to work is that when you impose the VSL, well, when the winter storm happens, the speed variance among vehicles really widens out. Some people continue to go 80, some people go 30, and you've got everything in between, and that in itself is a dangerous situation. This example is actually on I-80 in Wyoming, but it's such a beautiful example, where on the top chart, you have the speed distribution. It's pretty tight around the speed limit. The speed limit there was 75. In the storm, the speed is spread out to everything between 30 and 80. When they impose the variable speed limit, the variance cut down, also the average speed lowered. And then when the speed VSL is restored, then the speeds moved up again to more towards normal. So this is how it is supposed to work. This is, oh, and these colors are a little washed out too. This depicts the dates. There were 12 instances of the variable speed limit being activated this past winter. And you'll see the dates on the left. There's a 2-day period on each line. And it shows the time the variable speed limit was started and when it ended. And if the color were better, you could discern what speed they were. So the lowest one, the one on January 18th, actually went to 40 miles an hour. And it was kind of a short-lived one, but it was down to 40 miles an hour. Some of the other ones went to 60, 50, 70, and it's pretty hard to discern the colors the way it displays on the screen. But you can see some variations there where it was like on March 6th, it went down to 60 and then went to 70 and then back to 80. And this is kind of how it worked. So you can see that some of them were pretty short-lived. Maybe there was temporary visibility problems, and one was quite long. It spanned in 2 different days. So anyway. Some of the operational issues, and these are ones that Mark has identified. We've got a meeting scheduled next week with various DOT people and with staff of the highway patrol. And are there going to be local law enforcement in that, Mark? Or okay. Well, we're just going to go over what did we do, how well did it work, what should we be doing differently, and so some of the operational issues we encountered is this statutory ambiguity regarding the approvals needed. The way our enabling legislation was written is it said variable speed limits need the approval of the joint approval of the Secretary of Transportation and the Secretary of Public Safety, two cabinet level people. And our attorneys actually interpreted that to mean that every time you change the speed limit, you had to get concurrence of the two secretaries. And I mean, that's totally impractical. That would never happen. But by the time it did happen, it would be too late. And so we're taking a different interpretation, somewhat choosing to ignore the advice of our attorneys, but saying, no, the secretaries declare that this section of road is a variable speed limit section. And then we have rules that we use and procedures to set the speed limits and lower them. That's still kind of a question hanging out there a little bit, but I mean, the conservative interpretation just would never work. The activation method is manual, and so it's cumbersome. Mark had to do a lot of work to make this happen. We don't have an integrated ATMS, so when Mark was doing this, he had to look at cameras on one piece of software. He had to look at speed sensors on another piece of software. He had to look at the environmental sensors on another piece of software. And so this is a strong motivation for getting an integrated ATMS. About a week after we turned the signs on, one of them was hit and run over by a vehicle. It was a slippery road, and come the next morning, the sign was down. And so that was an expensive life cycle on that side. And along with that, one of our snowplows clipped another one of the posts, and it didn't damage the sign, but it tore the conduit loose, and we had to repair that a little bit. Luckily, did not lose the sign. But I guess that's just part of the game. When you put stuff out along the roadside, it's subject to getting hit. And then a real odd thing that we're encountering, I'm curious if any of you have seen something similar, but there's certain makes of cars and pickups, primarily Ford Expeditions and F-150s, that as they encounter a VSL sign, they will automatically slow down. It doesn't matter what the sign says. The sign says 80, it'll slow down to 50 or 60. They're not all, don't all slow down to the same speed. And looking for, yeah, there you are. You want to describe what you encountered this the other day?
So, yeah, the first two signs. Last night. I don't know what it's seeing. These, I know you said like 50, and 65. Gonna shut off. I even know.
Yeah. The first person that reported this was a woman from Aberdeen, which north of here, and she drives over on US 12 and then I-29 down to Sioux Falls, and she's honestly fearful of getting run over by a truck behind her when her truck, because her car, it's not a slow slowdown, it is a rapid slowdown, and she's scared that she's going to get hit from behind. I've tried to reach out to Ford. The Ford dealership's reaction is kind of curious. They say, well, that's the mapping, not the vehicle. And I said, well, the customer buy the mapping with the vehicle? The mapping, not the vehicle. And they really don't want to accept any kind of responsibility. And I've tried reaching Ford headquarters, and I haven't found the right person there after several tries. So we're still working on it, and we're gonna try some things with Daktronics. One of the theories is that perhaps onboard camera is seeing a partial character because the LEDs on a variable speed limit sign don't all light at the same time. They're multiplex. So this LED lights, this LED lights, this LED lights, and so maybe only some of the LEDs are lit while that camera is capturing an image. And so we're going to try upping the refresh rate on the LEDs to try to ensure that the camera gets a complete image. We honestly don't know if that's it, but we're hopeful that that might solve it. Whoops. So public attitudes about this. There are both supportive and questioning attitudes. So in general, I think people recognize that there's some safety benefit to this, and especially on that corridor, which has had a reputation for winter crashes. I think there's a sense that, okay, this does make sense. And also some support for protecting first responders. We've had highway patrol cars hit on that corridor. We've had snowplows hit on that corridor. And so improving the safety of the people who have to be out on the roadway. And law enforcement strongly endorses this, both at the state highway patrol and the county sheriffs. And kind of strong endorsement by people who understand what winter operations are about. The more you know about winter operations, the more likely you are to support this concept. And then there's also kind of a recognition of, you know, somebody from Mississippi driving on I-29 and not being able to handle the conditions, and just a recognition that not everybody's familiar with that corridor or of driving in winter. And so this makes sense for that reason. There still are people who think it's a speed trap. Even a couple of our legislators said, do you mean to say we have to tell people what speed to drive? And that's a curious statement since we have speed limit signs in a lot of places. Obviously, the system isn't perfect, and so sometimes the posted speeds may not perfectly match what somebody's perception is of the appropriate speed. And questions about legal authority and enforcement and fairness. And I think that's just due to the newness of the system. Can the state really do this? And yeah, we really can. And then the final concern is just about the cost and the return on investment, because people are aware that things cost money. And are you spending my tax dollars on something like this? But I think from our public information officers who handle the social media and so forth, the response has been predominantly supportive. There are exceptions, but predominantly supportive. So our next steps, we're going to take what we've learned from I-29 here and go back to that I-90 corridor and redesign it more economically. And that's scheduled to be built next summer. That's about a 15 mile corridor, starting at Sturgis and going eastward towards Rapid City. You've heard that we're going to acquire and deploy the ATMS, which will tie into this. We'll be reviewing our speed selection rules based on what we've learned this year. And my boss is the Secretary of Transportation, and he's asked me to sketch out some concepts for some different corridors. One of them, which would be here in Sioux Falls from I-29 south of Sioux Falls, northward either to I-90 or else to connect up with the VSL up at Brookings. And I-229 runs around the east side of Sioux Falls. That would be another possibility. We are looking at a corridor in Rapid City, from west of Rapid City to the east side where Ellsworth Air Force Base is, busy area. And another area, just because of the conditions, is on I-29 in the northern part of the state, from US 12 northward towards Sisseton, where it's particularly bad conditions. So these are all possibilities. I've got question marks after all of them. Please note the question marks. No commitment to any one of these at this point. And my last line here is dead serious. We need to get smarter about what we're doing because this really is a learning experience, a learning experiment. And presumably next year will be smarter than this year. And one of my sayings is if I live to be 400, I'm going to be really smart. And that's kind of the pace I'm on. So anyway, we'll learn together and get better at this. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, let's give them a round of applause. All right, we do have about 5 or 10 minutes here for questions. If there's any immediate questions for the presenters, you can walk the mic around too. I'll maybe start out the questions then. You had a brief slide up that had some safety results. I'm guessing that was more based on crash modification factors. Have you guys looked at the data over the past winter and compared that to previous winters as far as crashes along that segment of the corridor?
Well, and anecdotally, the compliance with speeds is pretty good. So that's one thing. And Mark, maybe you can comment. I think we've seen less incidents there than we have north and south.
Yeah, so coordinating with DPS, we compared it to the 20 miles directly south of the corridor. We had about a 25 to 30% reduction in calls for service.
Now, when we get the ATMS, we'll be able to capture complete. You know, right now, just looking at it manually, the data stream is pretty spotty. But with an ATMS, we'll be able to have complete records of weather conditions and speeds of everything, and then a more comprehensive analysis will be possible.
Thanks for the presentation. Dave, I just want to clarify that the ramp detection that detects cues, that doesn't automatically trigger like a cue detection system in that way, but it allows you to post messages on the DMS as needed. If there's cueing.
Right now, the cue detection goes nowhere because we don't have an ATMS to watch it.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Now, when that happens, we would be able to put something on the DMS. There's also a provision for connection. One of the interchanges has a signal at the bottom.
Okay.
And so that could go into the signal control.
Okay. But you get a notification or something, don't you? Did you say? Okay.
Yeah, that would be part of it.
Well, my vote for the next quarter would be, Summit area. I-29.
You travel that.
Well, I know how bad it is.
So, Dave, just looking at the future corridors that we're looking at around the state for Sioux Falls, the I-29, 229, are we thinking about potentially that we could build into the system too, like right at the peak 30 minutes in the AM and PM that we drop down to 55, but then be able to keep our speed limits up the rest of the day around it? Because I know that's people start asking us now about, you know, because we dropped to 65 going through the metro area, but people are starting to ask us to lower it now. And, you know, obviously that's not exactly what we want to do, but.
Well, that's a question fraught with political implications. But it brings up a point that that Travis brought up, and that is in Sioux Falls, we might be driven as much by incidents and traffic congestion as by weather. And so the rules of the game could be quite a bit different with an I-29 through Sioux Falls. So that's something else than the systems engineering that we're going to have to think about. I don't know about, going to 50.
I mean, it's just one of those things where people ask us things like that.
Yeah. That's about 3 levels above my pay grade.
MnDOT probably has a lot of examples of urban speed limit and how political that can get just with some of their interstate corridors.
And in my mind, I want to keep it at 65, but if the VSL gives us the opportunity to get it down to 55, impact is there.
Well, technically, the VSL could be done for incidents, it could be done for congestion, it can be done for a lot of reasons. In terms of policy and operations, that's more than a technical question.
Thank you. Nice presentation. My question is for Jake. For the system engineering analysis, do you have to create a separate CONOPS because it seems like the architecture is like pretty old and they don't have any provision of, I mean, definitely not the VSL, but nothing. I mean, it's not updated in terms of.
Yeah, so for this project, we did really go through the entire systems engineering process. As part of that, we did develop a CONOPS for how a VSL corridor would operate in South Dakota. Hopefully that can be used for other corridors as they go, but the CONOPS system requirements, validation plan, verification plan, we did go through that entire process and develop specific scenarios for how does this work during inclement weather, how does this work then, and then part of that is to make sure all the stakeholders are on the same page. You know, who's going to be responsible for making this thing work now, and then obviously when there's an ATMS, it can be a little different, but yeah, that was something that we developed specifically for this project, because it is a unique ITS application. You can't just take a CONOPS for a DMS or a camera deployment. It's a unique kind of corridor deployment. So yeah, we did do that and have that available.
And to some extent, the corridors are different. So the I-91 at Sturgis is not the same as Brookings. They're different considerations.
Dave, I think it took a few tries to get the legislation passed that allows this. I guess in your mind, what eventually changed that got it to pass?
I'm trying to remember. I think we got it on our. You remember, Travis? 2 tries? Second try. Okay.
Tried to pass an initial bill that would allow it to go wherever we wanted to go. We had to pare it down to these 2 test sections.
But I think it was just 2. No, we can do it anywhere on the interstates. It might have been introduced in one session of the next, but it wasn't a real difficult thing. One of the things I took to the legislative committees is some videos which you can get online of some of these pileups, winter pileups where you got 20 or 50. There's one from Wyoming where these spectators are alongside the road and they're recording just on a phone. The trucks come roaring in and crash. I mean, it's truck after truck after truck into a pileup. And, you know, we haven't had anything quite like that happen in South Dakota, although we did have one in a dust storm south of here, 3 weeks ago? Or so something like that is pretty convincing, and you know, the legislators all drive to Pier in the wintertime, and they have to drive the winter roads to get there. And so, you know, they're pretty cognizant of what the road conditions are like. So it wasn't real difficult. Ironically, one of the legislatures says, you just want to do this so you can get a traffic operations center. No. It's yeah.
You mentioned stakeholders a number of times in the presentation. Who were the stakeholders, and was there any public element to that? Like drivers or just the general public?
Two elements. We did hold a public meeting in Brookings, and there were citizens, law enforcement, and people who came were quite supportive of the concept. The other thing we have done, though, is we do a statewide customer satisfaction survey every 2 or 3 years. And one of the questions we've had on there for the last 3 surveys is, would you support temporarily lowered speed limits in bad road conditions? And the response to that has been kind of consistent. 2/3 of the respondents say, yes, we would support that. About a quarter say no, and then there's a few that don't know. And that hasn't changed a lot. It'll be interesting to see now that after we've actually done it, whether the response to that question changes on our next survey. So it was a little bit of specific to the Brookings area. We had public meetings. Statewide, we've done a customer satisfaction assessment.
We are at time now. I just wanted to thank our speakers again for their presentation. We do have some thank you gifts here, and we'll get the next presentation set up now. So our next two speakers are going to be talking about modernizing Omaha, implementing a long-term signal systems vision. With us today, we have Adam Denny from FHU and Brian Guy from the City of Omaha. Let's give them a round of applause to welcome them.
Thank you everyone for sticking around. Let's take the link. Thank you everyone for sticking around. Thanks Joe and NCITE for hosting us, and ITS Northern Lights for the opportunity to tag along to your program here. So a lot of cities and communities struggle with maintaining their assets. The big majority of those in some bigger communities is their signal system. So one of the things that Omaha did was they were took a proactive approach. A lot of communities are very reactive. So if they have a signal go down, they fix it. If they have a cabinet that's bad, they fix it. Detector, they fix it. Omaha's approach to this was started just over 10 years ago, trying to evaluate the system and basically modernize their signal system for the city. And what they did was they wanted to have a proactive approach to set themselves up for the future and what comes next. So a little outline for the presentation today. My name is Adam Denny. I'm with Fellsburg Automotive. I have Brian Guy with me. He's with the City of Omaha. He is the Assistant City Traffic Engineer for the city. So we're going to go through some background. Brian's going to talk about the master plan. I'll talk about some of the design and operational elements, and then Brian will finish it up with some challenges and the status and what's next for the City of Omaha. So I'll pass it to Brian.
Thanks, Adam. And again, like Adam said, I appreciate you guys inviting us up here. I think I've exhausted everybody in the Omaha area talking about this, so it's nice to have some fresh blood. So I think Adam's gonna, we got about 700 slides. I think Adam's gonna barricade the doors. We're gonna order pizza, and you guys are in it for the long haul here. So no, we're gonna try to be high level, keep it a little fast paced, but just want to share kind of our experience and what we've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years. So to start out, talking about where we were and going back to kind of the 2011-20 timeframe. The City of Omaha, for those not familiar, is a medium-sized city. As cities go, we have about over 1,000 signals within our jurisdiction that we own and operate, at least back in 2012. At that time, we had 0 PTC cameras. We had no ability to really monitor anything visually. The entire system was run on 170 controllers with PD software. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but not the most user-friendly software as modern software systems go. The interface was through a DOS-based software program that didn't require even a mouse to use it. So dot matrix printers were still the norm when I first started at the city. We talked to all of our signals, the vast majority of them anyway, via dial-up communications. So doesn't allow you to do a lot of things, but the very minimum. So here's just a map of the city pulled from our master plan back in 2012. A little difficult to see the detail, but obviously 1,000 dots spread out on that map. Downtown Omaha resides on the Missouri River on the east side. Across the river is Council Bluffs, Iowa. We operate obviously all the signals within the city. We also operate signals on state highways. So NDOT gives us the jurisdiction to maintain that traffic control. And we also operate Douglas County signals that are outside the City of Omaha. So So it adds up pretty quickly. Kind of the bottom portion of the image there is kind of see a border there. That's Harrison Street. It's also the county line where some of the suburban communities do their own thing. So like many jurisdictions out there, when I first got involved with this whole thing as a consultant, I worked for Iteris in the 2011 timeframe when the city started this master plan. So I kind of helped out with developing the master plan as a consultant. And then in 2014, I actually joined the city really as a way to help them implement this master plan. And when I arrived, the city was doing as much as it possibly could with the technology that it had. But you may be surprised to know that, we use Synchro to do a lot of signal timing like that. But, the 170s require force offs. So all of our timing for 1,000 intersections was converted to force off, handwritten in 1,000 different folders and filing cabinets. And here's just an example of one that I'm sure you can't read because, it's was written originally, it's been scratched out, it's been updated, we made temporary adjustments, we went back to the original. You can see over time, it's not a real efficient way to manage timing. So pretty quickly it was evident to me that we needed to do things a little bit differently. And I guess that blue box there, that's kind of the software interface to what we call traffic view. And I don't think you can probably see it on the screen, but it says there copyright 1986. And, we were still using it in actually we're still using it today. Slightly different version than what you see there, but at its core, it's doing the same thing. So again, dial-up communications, a master local system. We have 60, at the time we had 60 phone drops spread throughout the city, which operated, anywhere from 1 to 30 local controllers. You could talk to one controller at a time. So difficult to monitor 1,000 signals when you can only do one at a time. That's just a snapshot of the downtown area and the comm system. 170 controllers, I'm not going to get into this, but there's some beauty in their simplicity, but there's just a lot of things that you can't do with a 170 controller that the industry expects in 2026. And then our cabinets, we had a mix of cabinets. We're a Caltrans agency, but a lot of our cabinets were pretty old, very small. You're not going to get a lot of extra equipment. The core signal equipment, that's it. But to fit, communications equipment, modern detection systems, camera systems, it was going to be difficult to do that. So again, just another snapshot of our central management system, I guess, if you want to call it that. But pretty basic, but it did the trick for a lot of years. But time to retire that. So again, we went down this path of developing a master plan. It kind of started from, there are kind of two things, I think. Prior to me joining the city, the media, the local media wanted to do an interview with the traffic department. And one of their questions was where is your traffic operations center? And the traffic engineer at the time was like, there's like a dusty computer in the corner. That was it. There was no traffic operations center. And then also there was some desire to do adaptive, of all things, on a few corridors to potentially mitigate some issues. And so, we were far from doing any sort of adaptive system at that point in time. So kind of at the time, the people that were involved said, let's take a high level look at, what do we even need to do and what are the most important things that we need to accomplish? And that led to, pretty comprehensive master plan. I'm not going to read through all these things, but as you can imagine, it recommended that we do a lot of things that you guys are probably already doing. But basically at its core, we're replacing all the cabinets throughout the city. We're upgrading our controllers. We're going to run IP-based communications, preferably fiber to every cabinet in the city, procure an ATMS, deploy cameras for monitoring, TSP, and they're at the bottom, a traffic management center for our staff. And the master plan also looked at staffing levels. So the recommended staffing levels that you see there in the yellow on my screen, but per the US DOT, for a city of our size, recommended, 71 people in different roles operating our system. And back in 2012, there were a total of 20 of us. So, we're really limited from a staffing standpoint, as many agencies are. I have no expectation that we're probably ever going to reach these recommended levels. But since then, we have actually added a couple of engineers, a handful of signal technicians, some networking people. So we have made some progress over the years at trying to get more staff resources in place. And then our recommendations for a phasing plan coming out of the master plan. The colors again are hard to see, but we kind of divvied the city up into 10 different pieces at that time, and we're going to upgrade one after the other until we got done. The rough timeline at the time, again, this was 2012. I guess we had pretty aggressive expectations that we were going to start immediately the next year and we'd be done by 2023. I can tell you it's 2026 and we're still not done. But despite that, we're moving along. The end is in sight, and we'll talk a little bit more about progress later on. So estimated costs, again, back in 2012, to implement these 10 phases, we came up with a price tag of just under $35 million, which at the time was kind of an eye-popping number. We budgeted in our local CIP $1 million a year, and most of that was for just general replacement of outdated signals, more from a structural standpoint. So, the mast arms that about to fall down, just need to be rebuilt. So it seemed like a really daunting task. Like, where are we going to find this amount of money in this amount of time to get this all done? And we'll come back and talk about what we actually ended up spending and how we obtained that funding. But I'm going to turn it back over to Adam here, and he's going to talk a little bit more about some of the technical details.
Thanks, Brian. So this is kind of the consultant team that has worked together from the start to implement the city's vision for the signal system master plan. So the initial master planning efforts was done by the group on the left there. So that's ITERIS, GBA or GBSI systems integrators, and then HDR. And they initially worked as kind of a program manager for the first couple of years for implementation, helping set up some of the standardizations, utilizing the fiber backbone and setting that up for the city. And then the city then initiated basically 3 rounds of different on-call design contracts, kind of a 3-year period of on-call designs. So there's been 4 firms involved helping out the city basically implement the plan throughout the last 10 years. And one of the other things they brought in was a survey. And so they have 2 other firms here, Schemmer and CNC. Basically, they would come in front of the projects themselves and do the surveying to make sure if you ever do go out and check out a signal system network, there's probably quite a few signals that are not in public right of way. And that became a big issue during our projects, having to go through some of the NEPA and federal aid process during the funding. So the city kind of just went in front of us and made sure there was easements, permanent easements, temp easements, and all that was the infrastructure was within the right of way to help set us up for some success during the design phase. So some of the elements of the signal system master plan was a very large stakeholder engagement early on. You can see just a massive list here of City of Omaha agencies throughout the county, which Omaha's and Douglas County was an agency, and the city actually maintains their signals as well. We had to work with the Department of Transportation. We maintain all the state highway system signals that the state has in the Omaha area. And then a lot of municipalities as well, as there's one corridor that goes south outside of Omaha's jurisdiction that was an adaptive corridor that we had to work with other agencies to get their buy-in and then them onto the partnerships with the project. And then the one on the bottom right is Unite Private Networks, which I'll talk about later. They're now called SEGRO, but I'll just call them Unite or UPN. I do think their logo looks like the Sega logos, just a weird thing I was thinking about today. So partnerships up front was an early on thing we had to do. One of the other systems master plans update was, again, the conversion of that old database, that PD information, converted into MaxTime, which the new controllers would run. So we helped the city come up with some innovation to convert those using some software, as well as some AI, not really AI yet, but utilizing some innovation with Excel and programming to get the conversion of the old databases to the new format. Another thing we had to do was we updated all the clearances for every signal that we were working on throughout the city. Brian and his staff kind of set up some standards for signal timings throughout the city. So doing all the new measurements for PED clearances, yellow clears, red, all red, and coming up with new clearance timings for every signalized intersection that we were upgrading was also part of the project. This is max time, so this is the controller software that Brian gets to use every day once he gets the signal system upgraded to talk and implement new timings and mess around with signal systems. So that was part of the project that Brian gets to use on the back end to help him and his staff be more efficient in how they maintain their signal system. A big part of the upfront that made a lot of the design easier was updating the C standard specifications. So this is the cabinet that the Omaha came up with. It's based on a Caltrans spec here, but it's a 332L. We also have a 336X, which is basically just a little bit taller. So it gives us some extra space. There's some other little differences that the city and their signal technicians wanted to have within the cabinet. So basically every project we're coming through, we're putting either a new pad mounted cabinet, so pulling the old one out, putting a new one on the pad, or replacing all the pole mount cabinets with a 336L. Again, cost saving measures by keeping them on the pole as they go into a whole new pad. If we did a whole new pad, we'd have to rewire the whole intersection. So again, some cost savings built into this as well, but really the standard plate updates really helped, the design teams. There was 3 or 4 of us working together, usually 1 or 2 of us at the same time on a different phase of the project. So having that all standardization set up front was really beneficial to us to all be on the same plane, producing the same plans. One of the unique things about this endeavor was the city has city-owned fiber. They had an old copper-based system that Brian talked about a little bit that did have some fiber, or did have some conduit in the ground, but they did have the conduit available to use if it was in good condition to pull out and put new fiber in. But one of the decisions that they made early on was an agreement with UPN, so United Private Networks. In 2011, basically the agreement stated that they would allow UPN to put in conduit and fiber in city right away. In return, UPN would give them 24 strands of dark fiber to utilize as the city saw fit. So the city took that opportunity to utilize some of those strands for the signal system upgrade. You can see here, this is the UPN fiber back in 2012, which basically had a run along Dodge, which is the main east-west corridor through the city. It's blue in there, you can't see much. And then they had some plans to go north and south. So that was 2012. You look at their fiber network now, it basically covers the whole city of Omaha, or a majority of it, on their trail system. So today, I'm guessing we're probably about 60% of the signals get put on to UPN fiber. The other remaining signals have a combination of city-owned fiber or new fiber, or we're pulling new fiber in existing city conduits to make those connections. There are a few wireless pieces of communication where we run into some issues with the bridge structure or something where it kind of prohibits us from getting access to the cabinet, but very few instances of that. Historically, also, the city had a mix of detection technologies. So there was loops, which were very standard back in the day. We also had some video. We had some Sensi pucks in the ground. There was some radar, some thermal. So just all over the board. And one of the things we heard a lot from the signal techs was they just wanted to standardize the process. They wanted to be able to worry about one controller type, one detection type, one CCTV type. Made their jobs a heck of a lot easier, is what we heard from the signal techs. So that's one thing we tried to do was standardize what we were doing as far as detection. Through the initial signal system planning process, they came up with Wavetronics as the preferred detection type that they would put in at every intersection that needed detection. So that's kind of where we started with these single approach matrix detectors here from Wavetronics. As we've evolved in the signal system master plan, we'd also brought in some other Wavetronics products like the XP21, that single kind of canister looking detection thing. And then more recently, we brought in some MileVisions. The MileVision is primarily used at locations that have safety concerns. So the city of Omaha has a Vision Zero action plan. So if an intersection lies on one of the high injury intersection lists, we will then put a MileVision in to use some of the safety analytics and some of the data that it also gives us additional features with. A big thing, this is probably the most I guess, widely seen thing by the public was the introduction of the flashing yellow arrow. Nothing new, but it was actually very new to the city of Omaha 10 years ago. I believe Omaha was one of the first cities to implement this in the area. So, you know, every signal we're coming in, we're touching, we are taking down the old 5-section heads or 3-section red, yellow, greens and replacing them with 4-section or 3-section FYA heads. Again, additional safety benefits that we're getting from these. We've seen some really reduction in crashes at key locations with the left turns. It has legal lab operations, which provides some really good benefits for progression. On the back end of these projects, once it gets updated, the city will come through and do a quarter optimization project as well. So that's kind of the last phase, I'd say, of the signal upgrading is going to the optimization phase. And then again, some really great operational benefits of those FYAs that we also saw. One of the additional benefits is the city also implemented LPI at the majority of their signals now. So they have lead pedestrian interval, which is basically you give the pedestrian a walk phase. So they're out in front of traffic just a little bit so the vehicles can see them as opposed to the walk phase occurring when the other green phase is going. So some safety benefits there. We also use the FYA to kind of highlight pedestrian conflicts. So this is mostly at T intersections. So if we had a T intersection, that would typically be like a protected left, so it would have a green arrow only. We made it a 4-section head, so if that PED phase was activated on a leg, it would flash yellow and let the vehicle know that there's a conflict ahead. So again, some additional safety features for the pedestrians was implemented. Again, the city implemented ATMS software here. This is MaxView, so that's what Brian uses every day to monitor a signal system. So that was part of that signal system master planning earlier on that got updated, and now we're bringing signals online every year to the system. CCTVs, so the master plan called out a whole host of locations for CCTVs. These are your primary, your arterial intersections or above without the city. So the master plan kind of set the framework for where we wanted to put this CCTV system. We ended up using the Vigilon cameras and their system here to monitor the TV or the camera system throughout the state or the city. So Brian has access to these on his computer if he ever wants to look at the camera. Then the maintenance facility was something Brian mentioned. So this was something they did early on. One of the initial recommendations out of the master plan was to implement a TOC. So at their signal shop or the signal text work app, they have a smaller TOC with some video boards. And I don't think it's fully staffed all day, 24 hours a day, but it's staffed during some special events and stuff, whatnot. But they're also looking at what to do next with this TMC now. Now that they've got a lot of the signals upgraded. Brian mentioned the adaptive control. There was 4 corridors that were picked in the master plan. They've all been implemented as adaptive corridors, and I think they've all been turned off as adaptive corridors. So that's another discussion that if you want to talk about adaptive, Brian's got some insights for you on that. Some of the other benefits that we were seeing with the new signal system master plan, we were able to implement TSP allocations. Omaha, since the initial master plan, has installed a BRT. So we have Orbit, which runs down the main Dodge Street. If you're following Omaha news over the last couple of years, they're putting in a streetcar, which is a huge topic as well. So we're able to implement TSP with these transit uses here with our signal system by having it kind of future ready. And then also event management is also a key component of this. Omaha's got the College World Series. We have right next to it our big convention center, the zoo, some other arenas there. So being able to utilize a system that can be adaptable for event management is also something that the city wanted to do early on, and something that their system is set up to accommodate as we keep going further into the design. One of the things is Tim also, the city of Omaha and Council Bluffs has a traffic incident management plan. So what the city also has to do is wants to have the capability, if there's an incident on I-80, which is the primary corridor through town, it gets a lot of traffic shifted onto those parallel routes to be able to access those signals, implement new timings, which Brian and his staff will do. If there's ever an incident, they will go in and they have some pre-programmed patterns that they can run on the arterial network to help alleviate some of the congestion that is seen on the local network when there's an incident on I-80. So pull it all together. How did we take all these systems and recommendations and pull it into a plan set? So what the design team has been doing is going through several phases. I think Brian mentioned 10 phases initially, now they're broken into letters. So we have basically 20 phases, 22 phases or something like that. I'd say we're about 3/4 of the way through in the design of the signal system. There's probably 200-300 signals left that are still not online of the 1,000. And what we had to do this is FHU has been responsible for about 8 phases so far. And the kind of unique thing is the funding sources that Brian has been able to get has made this process go through the federal process. So every signal system plan has to go through NEPA, which is kind of a unique, we're not really doing much as far as ground infrastructure or ground penetration. We're basically pulling off the cabinet, putting a new one down, or pulling off a signal head and putting a new one in. So it was kind of a challenge, and Brian will talk more about this later, but going through that whole federal NEPA process was, it kind of slowed the process down a little bit. It made something we probably could have done very easily and efficiently in a less than a year, take kind of a 2-year process to get through, to get from actual design to construction and bidding. So the teams all work together to do kind of the conceptual design phase, which also our firms worked to the NEPA process. So identifying some of the wetlands, or if there's wetlands or forests. I think the biggest thing was probably old gas stations in the area. So you basically had to avoid, there was some throughout the design process, if there was like a gas station on a corner, you basically said, oh, we'll try to avoid any impacts to that corner and shift a conduit to the north side was probably the biggest change we had to make throughout the design process related to NEPA. This is just kind of showing the state of Nebraska's NEPA process here. So there's, I think, probably 6 or 7 different meetings called PCM meetings throughout the process that we had to go through to get towards a final NEPA approval of a document. Once we got NEPA approved, we then go into the final design phase and then go bid letting. So a very long process that we had to go through for each of these signal system phases, but that was what was required to get anywhere from, I think you got about $4 million a year in federal funding to help implement basically 2 phases each year is kind of the path we've been on. So how we set up the plans was basically we did a big data gathering effort for each signal system phase. The phases range anywhere from 20 to 60 signals, maybe a little bit more at a time. It all started with kind of a field review utilizing the signal technicians. They, I think, are the unsung heroes of the signal system, are the signal techs. So actually one of my favorite parts of the project is going out into the field with the signal techs and pulling conduits, opening pull boxes, seeing what's in there, learning about the system, learning all the issues so they had. So if we encountered a conduit that didn't pull, we would replace that with the project. So we were also doing ongoing maintenance updates too with the project. So they would know, like right when you got to the signal, they'd be like, oh, this corner is broke, this detector doesn't work, we need this, and that at the intersection. So it was really, really cool to understand their viewpoint. As an engineer, we probably just kind of sit there and design the plans on a CAD file and don't really understand what all goes into an actual signal and the maintenance of the signal that the signal techs deal with every day. So again, we also wanted to modernize the system, but we also wanted to bring everything up to current standards as well. So there was a lot of new conduits put in at intersections to replace broken conduits. There was a lot of rewiring at intersections that had splices all over the place that the city signal techs wanted redone. So a lot of maintenance upkeep that we also help at each signal. This was all kind of put together initially with a concept memo. So before we got into any design, we pulled this all together in a memo that basically outlined where we were going to propose to put new fiber, where we were going to change heads, which heads we're changing, where the fiber connection was going to be. All this was documented earlier on in the process and approved upon with the city staff and the consultant firm. And then this kind of set the blueprint for going into the design phase. Once we got to the design phase, it was kind of your basic signal design plans. So plans, specifications, and cost. The specs, again, one thing that was done early on was a full set of specifications that every firm was able to use as we went through the design phase. So that really helped streamline the process, have a consistent set specs. Same with the plans production. Every plan set for each phase was fairly consistent as far as the layout, the nomenclatures, bid items. So consistency was key so that we were also getting good prices from the contractors, and the contractors kind of knew what to expect each year, and the bids kept getting in. So we kept updating our unit prices every year as well as we get new bids from the contractors, because we had that kind of COVID in the middle there that kind of screwed up pricing out for a lot of stuff. So we've kind of seen that come back down. So we're adjusting our prices as we go through these different phases and learning from the past. I guess one other thing we would call out here is some detectors. So we did do some reprogramming of the detectors. So we would lay out the channels, the input numbers, again, everything to kind of program the controller and cabinet to accept the new technologies that the city is implementing. And then the fiber optics thing, so this was the interconnect was the next side of the project. This is just showing kind of the reviewing the GIS, identifying what's out there today, whether it's UPN, whether it's city, do we need new conduit, what are the obstructions, are there redundant rings or barriers we can connect with the signal system that maybe could help give some resiliency to the city. So these are all things we were looking at earlier on. This was put together through some network splicing. So we'd have our network architecture diagram for each of our signal hubs that we were tying into, looking at, what circuits we needed to activate to bring those signals online. We had a splicing diagram. We did have some standardization of the splicing. So that was another thing that helped us out a lot, was those were city standard plates. So we didn't have to call every splice and show a splice diagram for every intersection, but special splices, and then the switch layouts in the cabinets was also something we called out at every location in the plans that development process. So basically we did that kind of process for every single system phase to date. There's still a few more left, but it's been pretty amazing to see the transformation of the city signal system from DOS-based system now to a more advanced system, and really very proactive in setting the cities up for future proofing their system. So what they'll go with next, and Brian will talk about some of the challenges and where the city wants to go with their next set of signals.
All right, so yeah, you can imagine there were a lot of challenges that we encountered. We're not going to dwell on all the challenges in great detail today, but we'll hit on a couple. Adam mentioned environmental approvals, so we'll talk more about funding still, but yes, we ended up using federal aid for this overhaul, which means, we're going through the NEPA process, and, NDOT just isn't really used to doing this type of project. It's kind of like a square peg in a round hole type of thing, where it's not your typical roadway project, and but nevertheless, they didn't look at it that way. We still had to go through all this analysis, and it wasn't so much of a cost challenge, but just more of a schedule challenge. We don't know exactly how long it's going to take for these approvals to get through, and that's probably been the biggest challenge of it all. But so hazmat, wetlands issues, levees pose a big problem. We try to avoid those as much as we can. Parks and trails are a big one. Unfortunately, sometimes our conduits run underneath trails, and so we have a 4F impact. Omaha, or at least the eastern part of Omaha, is a lead Superfund site, so even digging down just a couple of feet kind of get into that contaminated soil, and so just lots of concerns with that. But the good news is, after you do this, 15, 16, 17 times, you feel like you start to gain some efficiencies, but it seems like the DOT always comes back and has a new surprise for us. So we're always continuing to be challenged. Right of way was another one that Adam mentioned. Again, with the federal aid process, the feds don't really want to spending money on something that's in private property. And unfortunately, over the years, these signals are in some cases extremely old in urban areas. The poles ended up on private property. And so we kind of quickly found out on our very first project, which we called Phase A1, that we had several poles and cabinets on private property. And unfortunately, that really slowed us down right off the bat. So from that point on, we said, okay, we're going to proactively go out and survey every single signal, determine which ones may not be in the public right of way, and obtain a permanent easement. We didn't move the pole, we just obtained a permanent easement, which allowed us to move forward with improvements. Even though our signal techs have been and continue to go out there and perform maintenance on those items. Just a different funding source, different rules. One other challenge, I guess I call it a challenge and a success, but one thing I wanted to highlight is, since this whole master plan has started, the city's actually permanently removed, taken out of service, 75 signals from our system. about 45 or 50 of those, we just straight out pulling the signal out and replacing it with either a two-way stop or all-way stop control. So if anybody out there is contemplating signal removals, I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, but it can be done. I guess my recommendation for you would be to do not what we did, which was, we started actually with probably some of the most difficult signals in the most difficult neighborhoods, where they were very adamant about keeping their unwarranted signal. And so, we had success. We removed quite a few. There's probably a lot more that I would say technically didn't meet warrants, but for whatever reason, it was determined to leave them in. But 75 signals, that's a lot of money that we didn't spend on upgrading unnecessary signals. So I just wanted to highlight that. So now a little bit about where we're currently at with our system. So the colors show up decent, I guess. So this is a map of the city. Everything in green there, which is the majority, is now complete. The areas in orange are under construction this year. Areas in blue are under design, and then the lighter gray areas we still haven't gotten to yet, which is the majority of our downtown area and kind of the far southwestern portion of the city. We're also retiming all these corridors as we go through. So basically the year after we do the construction, we come back and we retime again with the help of our consultant community, and really extracting the benefits of the flashing yellow arrow and all these new features that we now have in the controllers that we didn't have before. And really that's been helpful for us in justifying additional funding. Talking a little bit about schedule and phasing plan. So this schedule now pushes us out to the year, it looks like 2030. And in the phasing on the left side is a little different. It's not 1 through 10. It's now A1 through H2. But it kind of breaks it down by phase. So, for our last two phases, H1, H2, we started those back in 2023 doing the warrant analysis. It will take 6 or 7 years, just, I don't want to say primarily because of the permit process, but to basically get to the end point where we're actually retiming those corridors. So in order to deliver 22 phases in 10 or 12 year period, in any given year, we're working on 10 or 12 or 14 different projects, each of which are about 50 signals apiece. So there's a lot going on. So I mentioned early on, $35 million was the projected cost. We kind of have a pretty good idea, even though we're not quite done, how much it's going to cost. And so I'll summarize that here if anybody's interested. So again, construction estimate $35 million back in 2012. I'll break this down kind of by phase. So warrants, we spent $0 million on that because we pretty much did all that in-house. So that was a nice cost savings, although it cost me a lot of gray hairs. Survey and right away, again, not something we really anticipated doing at the master plan level. We spent about $2 million on that. Design services, so hiring Adam and his team and all the other consultants has been about $9.4 million. Again, the thing about the master plan is we didn't necessarily identify what some of these other costs were going to be. So you can quickly see that the cost, we're already at $11.5 million. And we're not even to construction yet. Another $1.7 million for NEPA services. Again, the cost there isn't terrible, but more so on the time and schedule impacts. Utilities, $1.6 million. This primarily are the costs that went to Unite Private Networks for us to splice into their system. A one-time upfront fee. We don't pay any maintenance on that moving forward. So despite this cost being there, the alternative would have been to build 50 additional miles of fiber optic cable at a much higher price. So now we get to the big one, construction. It's probably going to end up being about $66 million. And I know that sounds like it's way off, way high. One, if you adjust 2012 dollars to today, 35 million is equivalent to about 50 million. The other thing that we kind of did differently that our master plan didn't really identify, Adam touched on it with detection, but the master plan didn't really talk about replacing all of our detection, and we still don't replace everything, but we're replacing quite a bit. We found pretty early on that our detection systems were really on life support, and they needed more attention than we thought. And so we have been deploying way more detection than the master plan called for. Construction administration services, as we hire contractors to do this work, $6 million for that. And then when we sought some additional funding sources, CMAQ funds being one of those, we also started to now retime all these corridors. So we spent about $4.5 million on that. So the grand total, I'm thinking where we're going to end up is about $91 million. So that's a lot of money. And so you thought $35 million was a lot of money. It's like, where in the heck are we going to find $91 million when we budget $1 million a year? And so, well, a couple different sources. So I don't know about you guys, but you know, this is a typical street scene in the city of Omaha where the traveling public just loves everything that we do. They toss money out their windows. They're like, just do something. You guys are doing a great job. So, no, that's not correct. The public, you know, well, I'm not saying that they're opposed to the project. They're probably not as passionate about it as we are. So Omaha, known for Warren Buffett, lives just a few blocks away from me. And I think a lot of people from outside thinks Warren Buffett just funds all of our needs there. So here he's handing over a check for $250 million to this lady in green. I don't know who she is, but again, that did not happen. So we did not get our $91 million from Warren Buffett. So third idea was, well, let's take a play from college sports, and I will sell my name, image, and likeness through jerseys to raise money. And so far, this has brought in about $75 million, believe it or not. There were some Adam Denny jerseys available, but those had to be discontinued because nobody was really buying those. So, so it's been a good source of funds. Kidding. That was also just a little bit of a dream of mine. So, so where did we get the funds? Well, not to be too anticlimactic, but it was through a lot of different federal aid sources. So some of these probably look familiar to you. So we started the project out with a lot of STBG funds. We funded our adaptive corridors with HSIP. We had a little earmark in there from our congressman back in the day. But the biggest funding source that we kind of found about midway through the project was CMAQ funds. So this is where we said, okay, if we start retiming these corridors, we can include those benefits of retiming in our benefit to cost calculations, and now we're eligible for that pot of money. So that was a good source of funds, but it also added to our workload by now taking on all this retiming projects at the same time as all the infrastructure project. We've also been awarded some CRP funds recently, and we've got out of the 91 million, all but the remaining, you know, I got 2.2 million there. I think it's a little bit more, but we've applied for a Safe Streets for All grant. I'm confident one way or the other, at this point, we'll be able to scrape together the remaining amount. So, which is good news. And I think, you know, I ask myself, how did we actually achieve that? I think, you know, we've actually delivered on our results. We've implemented what we've said we're going to do. We've been sharing our success with our administration, with the state DOT, with our MPO. And I think everybody's kind of bought into the benefits of doing it this way. So, and despite the higher costs, the $91 million cost, you know, the overall program still has a calculated benefits cost ratio of 6 to 1, which is, you know, good for an infrastructure project. So kind of to wrap things up here, what's next for us in Omaha? We're actually gonna, we have about 3 years left on implementing our current plan, but we're actually gonna start kind of this whole process again, believe it or not. And I guess at this point, we're just calling it Master Plan 2.0. We issued an RFP just a couple of months ago, and actually just yesterday we informed the AECOM team. Ming Shun Lee is here somewhere. Adam is also part of that team. We couldn't get rid of him, but so they're going to help us kind of develop a new master plan, look ahead 15 years into the future. The idea is not that we're going to necessarily replace anything that we've done to date. I don't want to do that. But there's a lot of technologies, a lot of strategies and business practices that we need to start thinking about with all these tools that we now have. So kind of looking ahead and figuring out what's the next priority and you know, I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars we'll need here, but I'm excited to kind of, after, you know, doing somewhat repetitive projects for the last 10 or so years, it's kind of fun to take a fresh look. And I'm very grateful for the consultant community that's helped us out over the years. It's been a lot of fun working with everybody. Been challenging, but at the same time, very rewarding as well. So that's kind of it for us, for our presentation today. Appreciate your time and attention, and I think we're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, let's give a round of applause first.
Shannon Austin here in Sioux Falls. With those signal upgrades, were you also required to make ADA ramp improvements, like put up pedestrian push buttons? Did that add to your costs as well?
So we actually, we did not upgrade ADA facilities as part of this. I mean, it was something we talked about early on. And I mean, I think we were in touch with both the DOT and FHWA about that issue. And you know, this was many years ago, but basically they allowed us to move forward without doing that. Now, the ADA rules have kind of changed since 2012, and we still have a lot of, I mean, the vast majority of our push buttons are not ADA compliant. They're not style, but that's one of the things that we'll be looking at with this new master plan. How exactly do we want to tackle that issue? From an ADA ramp standpoint, we've kind of got another program at the city that implements the ramps. So that was ongoing during this whole time. But yeah, the you know, ProAg and ADA compliance is not something we have achieved, and it's something we'll continue to work on.
The only pedestrian stuff we did with the project was we would, if there was a crossing that some reason didn't have a pet head or a push button, we would add that with this project. Or if there was something broken, we would fix more maintenance of the pedestrian system with this project. But yeah, the ProAg thing will be probably a big thing we have to figure out, and how we handle primarily a lot of the downtown network that's all fixed time that would require some sort of APS button, which would be basically a dummy button for those signals, since they're all fixed time and on pet recall. But figuring out how that works. Also, I think an implication would be how nighttime flash would work. The city runs night flash all the time. So how does that impact with the new ProAg APS buttons? Two things we have to figure
out. You mentioned the extended NEPA process. Were you able to do that on a kind of like a piecemeal thing rather than an overall project? I know they usually want you to have an overall big package for them to approve it. It sounds like you were able to do that on like a package by package process.
Yeah, it was a phase by phase project where we had to go through basically the same NEPA process for the whole signal system, whatever corridor we were looking at. We had to look at all the environmental constraints. I think one of the things we've kind of talked about doing is a programmatic agreement this next phase. So having an agreement up front with the DOT that covers everything. So then we're not having to go project by project, phase by phase, and do NEPA over and over and over again.
I had one question on development. Were there any like major developments that kind of rearranged how you're prioritizing with the master plan and which corridors we're seeing it?
Yeah, I mean, there's developments always ongoing. There's a lot of things, you know, fortunately Omaha's growing at a steady pace. And, you know, we do push a lot of costs onto our developers. Anytime they, you know, anytime they had to touch an intersection or touch a signal or build a new signal, they were required to build it to the new standard and get it connected to our communication system, which, you know, there were some challenges with that sometimes if we were working in an area that hadn't really been upgraded yet. But I had one other thought, now it escaped me, but But yeah, we do rely on our developers for, improving a lot of our, not only signal system, but just kind of public improvements to the roadway adjacent to their developments as well.
So we are at time. I just wanted to thank the ITS Minnesota team again and ITS Northern Lights Conference for having NCITE. Thank you again to our speakers, Brian and Adam, on finishing out this meeting. And with that, thank you everyone for attending both the conference and our roadshow.